time is now 6:14. I would like to call our Downers Grove Public Library Board of Library Trustees Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Caitlin, can you proceed with the roll call, please?
Trustee Doherty? Here. Trustee Gagnon? Here. Trustee Humphries?
Here.
Trustee Kutia? Here. Trustee Stapleton? Here. President Graber?
Here. Thank you very much. We're now on to agenda item number 3, public comment. Do we have any public comment?
No comments.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now on to agenda item number 4, equity, diversity, and inclusion training, led by RGW Consulting. Welcome to our meeting.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you all for having me. Yeah. Is there a way to tap into
Did the lights maybe? Or
them, and then also do I just use this one?
Oh, yes, Ed can help you get started with that.
All right. I'm going to take about 2 minutes to do this. But while I do that, I think what would be useful is if we take 2 minutes, naturally, to just think about one thing that you hope will come out of your DEI journey, which means it may or may not happen tonight, but something that you're hoping you will glean as a result of this experience and share together over time. So let's take a couple minutes to do that while I set up the slide. off a little bit because it's my first day back from vacation. And I'm not used to sitting as long as I have already today. Where did you go? I went to Little Rock, Arkansas. I went to Houston, San Antonio, New Orleans, Atlanta, back to Chicago, then back to New Orleans, then back to Atlanta, then back to Chicago.
You had to be in New Orleans. Were you helping anywhere?
Mostly road trips. I was only on a plane one time. And I have family and friends in all those places who I haven't seen for, in some cases, years because of all the things. So it was good to be with people. And I got some rest too, just nice. But of course, I just came back with a million new ideas and workshops, so my team is already ready to jump further. We have a lot of work to do. But I'm excited to be here. I'm like really excited to teach because I haven't taught in a month. And so I would love to start just by having you share what your one thing is that you've written down. And we could start with Swapna.
I would say just examining situations through different lenses. And I think last month at our meeting we talked about land acknowledgement, and I think I struggled a little bit with who I am as a person and my own experiences with, okay, what is the general patron going to feel, and it took a while for Cindy and Man talking about the purpose of land acknowledgement for me to really understand that. And I'm glad we went through the extra discussion to kind of reach that, because it really helped me kind of sit better with where we were at the end of the evening. So
Yeah, I think I wasn't even there, but just from what your name is, Swapna, it sounds like you did the thing that this work really only ever affords us, which is an opportunity to pause and look at it from a different perspective and hear from each other in ways that we otherwise wouldn't if we were definitive about our decision, right? So, yeah, in a lot of ways that's preparatory, and it also is why we're here. Those moments won't ever stop being moments, right? So thank you for sharing the importance of multiple lenses. We're certainly we'll be in that tonight, so you'll get to do your thing tonight. David.
Speaking of different perspectives, since we started this process some months ago, I've had a number of people come up to me and say, why are you doing this? Why do we need to do this? Why is this important? And two things, I guess. One is, I hope I have the right answer. More importantly, I hope they understand the answer and thank us for doing this.
Thank you for that.
General, that's
Yeah, and I don't think that question's going to go away either. I'm with libraries a lot. I have a lot of libraries as clients. And every time I hear, why are we doing this? I want to come on one evening and be the experience in the library, like as a part of programming, to talk about it with people. But the reality is that will help whoever showed up that night. And the next day, there will be people saying, why are we doing this? So it's just a
I like
question.
to name a couple of people. I chose not to.
And also, do I really want to be in that room? Carissa?
I think one thing I'd like to get out is just being able to be a better ally. By that I mean, I guess, the ability to listen when it's my turn to listen, which is in this journey probably most of the time. And like Swapna said, to be able to then understand when my own lens and my own perspectives get in the way of a conversation that can move the work.
And there is a whole component of workshop that will be just on allyship. We won't get to it directly tonight, but it is in the trajectory. So we'll spend some time there. Good. I'm feeling like I can do this stuff. Jonathan.
I'm actually very much, what I was going to say is very much aligned with what Swapna said as far as being able to better understand other people's perspectives. I've struggled with this throughout kind of the entire process, from like the initial statements that we've put out to the land acknowledgement, in just trying to better understand, why these statements are important to the people that we're making the statements to, and really just trying to better understand that. So yeah, that's, I think, what I'm continuing to, want to learn. And I think I'm also aligned with Dave and Carissa as well, as being able to better, be better advocates on behalf of these issues, on behalf of the library, on behalf of the community, and I think this training will help in that process.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because as we do this training, I will be able to help make you more sensitive to hit MPG's perspectives. Having said that, there are a bajillion hit MPG perspectives. And so what we often run into, Jonathan, is a situation where I'm compelling you towards a majorative hit MPG posture. And then some black woman will walk up to you as a board member and say, why are we doing this? And it will be the most disoriented moment, because you're like, okay, wait, Rashida, you didn't tell me what to do in this case. I thought her voice would be the voice who understood, right? But because of the way this country has worked, especially around desegregation and the integration of schools, we didn't really have a real solid game plan. And so everything just kind of got thrown together. And now you have people from all different spaces, all different races, ethnicities, cultures, religions, sexual orientations, and genders, and you don't know who you're looking at anymore, and you don't know what their perspectives really are. I was in a workshop here recently, it's maybe been about 8 months, and the loudest voice against having anti-racist curriculum at the middle school level and beyond in the school district was a black woman. And I was so disoriented. I was like, I don't understand what's happening in here. And I do this every day. It was still like I had to adjust myself. And it was on a Saturday morning. It took me all day to like reconcile the disappointment I was feeling and the questions coming from someone who looks and sounds like me. But the reality by the end of the night was, well, she should have the same opportunity to have whatever perspective she has as any other person, lest now we're producing an inequity and injustice by being presumptive that she has to think the way I think because she looks and sounds like me, right? And so it's just layers upon layers upon layers, and I think that's why we really have RGW, obviously are my initials, but RGW stands for Reimagining and Generating Wonder. Because when we take a definitive posture about this work, no sooner than we get clear and definitive, some case pops up that disorients everything all over again, right? And the tagline for our company is let's get curious. Because unless we maintain that posture of curiosity, we will still start to like typify, generalize, stereotype, because technically that's what I was doing in that moment, right? So I think that staying open and staying curious and asking a lot of questions in spaces where people are asking why we're doing this, I think will be really important. Kim?
Along those lines of being curious, and for me to, I want to take away great questions that I could ask of people that I am different from, so that I can establish those relationships, because I do want to break down barriers and get to know them, but sometimes you're hesitant about the right questions.
Yeah, for sure.
So I can be a better person in that area.
Thank you.
Well, I have something kind of similar to Swapna, but I think for me it's a little like what we learn here into all aspects of life, and sort of how to like mentally decolonize my brain from not just here, but in everything I do. And so I wrote that down, and I also wrote how not to get frustrated and angry, because I get really stuck. I know that I get really stuck and like, why don't you get it? And then I start to like, and then I have trouble moving forward because I want everyone to sort of be where I am, and maybe they're not, and that frustrates me, and I need to learn how to not get frustrated. frustrated. So a little bit of like kind of decolonizing and not get frustrated, which is also maybe white supremacy making me get frustrated when it comes to So
No
all
problem
those
with that.
things.
I got it. I can handle it. No, I have the same reference all the time. There's a, oh gosh, you all vacation brain. The title of the work is The Uses of Anger. Adjournment is the writer. Oh, I'm gonna be like that for a couple weeks now. One bit of information, but the other part is missing. Adjournment, The Uses of Anger, and reading that piece for me, Barnelli, it helps me to understand that I ought to be mad about some stuff, right? And that there is a righteous indignation that comes with this work. How we mitigate or manage our emotions, like you'll do a class with me called Emotional Collaboration, where instead of Barnelli having to neglect a valid and credible frustration, if we can learn how to be collaborative, then I can name that this is really frustrating for me, and it makes me extremely angry, and here are the reasons why. And that wouldn't be considered unprofessional, because as a woman of color who is oppressed by a lot of the things that this work is about, I don't think it's authentic to say, would it make you angry? Like, if you put your boot on my neck and I can't breathe, that is going to upset you, right? And even if that's not literal, it's more metaphorical, those feelings are very natural. And even asking me to deny myself that is white supremacy. Does that make sense? So how do I find the uses of anger, right? And how do I do the work of practicing mitigating that in ways collaboratively, in ways that create transformation, in ways that devolve or deteriorate white fragility? Because the reason why anger can't be seen as useful in a lot of cases is because of white fragility. So I literally have to suppress what is a legitimate emotion for an emotion that is actually not legitimate. Does that make sense? I'm way ahead of myself in the coursework, but I think it's important to kind of sit with what's in the room a little bit too. And that kind of stuff is what's going to make us ask curious questions. Like if Julie, and I can pick on Julie now because we've been friends for 100 years. And Julie's like, but that makes me sad and I want to cry. And I'm like, yes, but it actually stops my children from going to healthy hospitals, right? That makes me angry. You're sad because you don't want me to talk about it. Like, what are we doing here? Does that make sense? And so I think we have to kind of, you're going to hear me talk about living in the tension, resting in the tension, being in the tension of things, rather than trying to find a quick solution, because oftentimes when we find the quickest solution, it's the hit MPGs that are not included in that solution orientation.
Can you refresh what MPG is?
Yes, hit MPG is historically, intentionally, and traditionally marginalized people groups.
Oh, yes.
Thank you for that. And Julie?
Well, mine is with kind of a broader picture kind of look, and bringing the Downers Grove community together around DEI work with positive impacts for our hit MPGs and their experiences of Downers Grove and
I love that. And it makes me super excited. As I recently submitted an RFP for Morton Arboretum, and I recently accepted an agreement, actually I'll be back here tomorrow, to do training for Midwest University. Something's happening here, and I'm not exactly sure what yet, but it feels exciting to think about all the synergy in one place. And I don't think it's just because RGW is here. I know Downers Grove's been doing work for a while. But there's been a lot of hurt and pain nationally over the last couple of years, and I think people are ready to synergize, and that's super exciting. I will not neglect that there are other human beings in the room. Do you all have things you want to share as well?
I'm Jen. I was just gonna say that one of the things that I'm looking to get out of all this work is to truly reduce the gap between
between all the things that I'm learning and all the passion that I have inside and how I behave. So I want that gap to be minuscule. I want it to decrease more and more and more as I continue learning to affect change in other people, or at least just to have open conversations with people. So I know that sounds really selfish and personal, and but I feel like if the work doesn't start with me, I'm not. There's no point.
Yeah, and you know this because you've been in my training, but there are 4 quadrants. Internal is first, right? And then interpersonal is second, institutional is third, and systemic is like all of it, right? How does the federal government inform how the Illinois Public Library informs how DGPL operates and how that impacts every human body here and how you connect with one another, but also how you internalize how that whole thing is impacting you, right?
I was just going to ask, is that hierarchical, or can you work on one quadrant? Do they build on each other, or are they all completely?
It's so organic. There's nothing linear about it, right? It's so messy. Yeah. Just today, my daughter is homeschooling. My sister-in-law called me because my niece, who's 1 year behind my daughter, she lives in Georgia, they have her on a waiting list. She has asthma, so she can't go back in the building. And I keep telling my sister-in-law, it's against the law for her to be on a waiting list for school. And she's like, well, maybe in Illinois. No. Federally, that is not a thing that can occur, right? And so the federal law says it's against the law, but the school is institutionally making a decision that's not in line with the law. So then she's trying to put her in an online school. Well, my daughter goes to a private online school, which costs us money. And she's like, where's the free version of this? I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta go do a training on why this is stupid, right? And all of that is just one kid, right, in one place, and that's every single quadrant. And the internal part is that my niece is crying because she knows that Olivia's now not, my daughter won't have time to hang out because she's starting homeschool, and now she feels sad. And she's going to internalize the why of that and just take it with her on her life journey. And I'm watching this happen, and it's nothing I can do, right? And the interpersonal is that my daughter feels bad because her first cousin, they're 1 day apart. She's like, how can I go to school, but she can't go to school? In 2021, friends, this should not still even be a conversation, right? So you can see how those 4 quadrants get all in like 2 seconds. It's hard to unravel what's what, right? And we will address the 4 quadrants. Some of this training you all have already, some of you have already had. But that's part of the spiraling too. Every time you get it, it goes deeper. And the more people have it, the more common and shared language you'll have, right? Like, what's a hidden PG again, right? After a while, everybody will have that same language. Caitlin, did you want to add anything?
I sat in on the board trainings. I have a management team and house and staff, and it's interesting to hear all the perspectives. But again, a little selfishly, allyship has been my goal, wanting to and getting those questions of why are you doing this, and just in general wanting to make sure that I have substance behind my words and my actions, and make sure that I'm not just saying the right things and doing the right things, but there's the knowledge behind it and the drive behind it to make sure that I'm doing it the right way.
Sure.
Being as supportive as possible.
Yeah. Thank you. And anything?
I guess like a couple of things. I'm a pretty introverted person, so like build up like courage to for allyship, and also like balancing like when maybe like my power or anger as a white man can be helpful, or like when what I really need to be doing is like being more supportive, more sensitive to people, I guess. That. And also stuff that like even like as somebody who thinks of themselves as like be broad-minded where I have like gaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Your questions are going to take like 100 years.
Thank you. All right. I will almost always start our sessions with music because it's what we all share, and it's what I've never met a person that's like, oh, I hate music. I don't know if I want to be that person. It binds us together in a way that makes room for difficulty to happen. This song I've probably shared with you before. My entire team is sick of it. They want to retire it. But it really does characterize and embody the posture that's required to do this work. And I've listened to it definitely over 1,000 times. And I still find new things every time I hear it. So you have to suffer me one more time and place it on the canvas. I literally looked for other things. And then we have a library of these now. And I still chose painting on canvas because it's just the right one. So the words will be there, you'll hear the music. I want you, if you've heard it before and you rely on the words, then listen to the melody and see if it inspires anything in you about this work. If you've heard it before and you listen to it for the words, listen to what repeats and consider how that also informs the work. There's a lot of layers here.
We are like children, we're painted on canvases, picking up shades as we go. We start off with gesso, brushed on by people we know. Watch your technique as you go. Step back and admire my view. Can I use the colors I choose? Do I have some say what you do? Can I get some greens and some blues? We're made by the pigment and paint that is put upon. Our stories are told by blues. Like Motley and Hidden, these masters of peace and light, layers of color and time. Step back and admire my view. Can I use the colors I choose? Do I have some say what you use? Can I get some green with my blue? We're just like children, we're painted on canvases. We are like children, we're painted on canvases, picking up shades as we go. We start off with gesso, brushed on by people we know. Watch your technique as we go. Step back and admire my view. Can I use the colors I choose? Do I have to say what you do? Can I get some greens and some blues? We're made by the pigment of paint that is put upon. Our stories are told by blues. Like Motley and Hidden, these masters of peace and light, layers of color and time. Step back and admire my view. Can I use a car? Do I have some say? What do you use? Can I get some green and some blue? We're just like children. Oh, we're just like children. We're just like children, we're painted on canvas. Admire you. Admire you. We're just like children, 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 children.
So the questions I want you to consider, what resonates with you about the song, and then what things do you hear that might be helpful to our time together? What resonates? What things do you hear that might be helpful? I'll leave the lyrics up, set a timer for 2 minutes, and then we'll share it out. 2 minutes. One more minute. So I don't always know what's registering in people's bodies at different points in the training, but I know that categorically, professionally, usually this part feels like a fluff, and internally we can start to feel like, what are we going to start? When are we going to start? So if you're feeling that, I want you to be curious about where that feeling comes from. And I want you to be curious about what feeds that feeling. What kinds of messages have we heard and embodied, especially as it pertains to boardrooms and professionalism, that cause us to have angst or concern when we spend so much time on this kind of part of the work. And what aren't we doing that feels like it should be more important? What aren't we doing that maybe feels like the work should be predicated on that other than something like this? Because the reality is that when we sit in spaces like this, it's what we refer to as the stage zero work. It's the work before the work. It forces us, it encourages us to talk about how we feel. It encourages us and entices us to tell stories. And it is through those things, how we feel and storytelling, that we really get to know each other. A lot of times at tables like these, we're dealing with policies, right? Bylaws, and all that fun stuff. And we do a lot of voting at tables like this. And if I'm at a table like this, and I serve on boards all the time, on 3 right now, if I don't know Carissa, then I can't understand. And it will be difficult for me to understand why she's voting the way that she is. And what's worse is it will also be difficult for me to ask her why, right? It will be difficult for me to, after the meeting, say, help me understand what your thinking was behind that. It will be hard for me to access her lenses if we don't take the time to do this kind of work. And let me just also name the other elephant in the room, which is that we have all of these institutional policies and protocols that govern the space as well. So it becomes very difficult also as a trustee to do this vulnerable and emotional work when you can't, by law, have a closed session where vulnerability is more accessible, right? And I named that because I know that we're doing this. Hey, friends. And it's important to say that those are the very systems and structures that keep us from accessing each other in ways that make us make better policies, right? Because we don't have the humanizing aspects that helps me say, Swapna, before we go to vote here, I want to understand where you're coming from. I don't even know what that's going to do to my vote. Maybe nothing, but at least I can make an informed decision. And my decision should be informed by my colleagues. But if I don't know my colleagues, then my decisions are less informed by my colleagues. And this is why do we need to do this? Because DEI work is this. This is the diversity and the equity and the inclusion of whole bodies coming to a table together and then operating as one whole body representing the Board of Trustees for the library. You can't be one whole body if you don't have the time and space to understand. Like, I'm not a whole body if I don't know how my right arm works. I'm not a whole body if I don't know how my left leg works, right? And so but this that I'm doing right now, when people are asking why we're doing DEI and anti-racism work, they don't think we're talking about this, right? They have a preconceived notion of what that is usually most typically informed by the last most traumatic experience they've had around race or gender or culture or sexual orientation or religious affiliation. And if their prior schema has negative connotation and that's informing their question, then you get, why do we even need to do this, right? But this is diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism work. And this is the work that we do need to do together if we're to operate as one whole body representing ourselves as a board of trustees. Okay? It's recording, right, Ed? Because that was good. So tell me, what do you hear and see in this song? What resonates with you and what themes will help us to do this work together? Yes.
I talked about assumptions you make. And so the one that Swapna and I both lived this, which is a model minority myth, right? And so we have both experienced it we're Asian and we're supposed to be good at math and we're supposed to be smart, we should be doctors, right? So it's like that assumption that people take of us when they just see us, that sort of, that like, do I have some say in what we use? I thought about that, like, what do people think about us when they see us? What are the assumptions they make? So that was the thing that stuck out to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Do I have some say what you use? And who gets to say and when? And should that be definitive even? What they get to say, and then that's just it, right? Or should there be more fluidity and more of an organic nature to who's saying and who gets to say the say, depending on what the context is? Yeah. And what is superimposed, right? Thank you. Someone else. Kim, and then swap them.
We're always the same.
I know.
Second. I liked the phrase "step back and admire my view."
Yep.
I think as you age, you do that more. When you're a kid, you could just go like right by the Eiffel Tower and just be like, "There's a candy store in there." And I probably started to appreciate art more and step back and look at it and take it in and figure out how you feel and things like that. And so I noticed it was in there, I think, 5 times. And I didn't know, I'm not an artist, so I didn't know what gesso was. And I'm saying gesso. And I looked it up, it's a white paint mix, so that also is ironic. Not really, I made on purpose, right? That's where you're starting from in the systemic events. So I'm glad I Googled the word, because I didn't know the first time I listened to it.
I tell people in the beginning all the time, but then I personally started getting curious about whether or not groups look for it, and so far, more and more frequently, people look it up and they're like, oh. So gesso is a white pre-finish for canvas. It goes down before anything else can go on it. It's literally white before we start, right? So now I'm leaving it as like the little golden Easter egg to see who's going to find it. Yeah, and how does that inform? So you're going to hear me, the more you're bothered with me, ask the question of how is white supremacy informing the equity work we're doing? Right? In what ways are we allowing the dominant cultural way of being to inform the non-dominant culture evolution and manifestation? What are the things that are deeply and steeply rooted in whiteness? And we'll talk about characteristics of whiteness, and we'll talk about how they inform who we are and what we do, no matter what color, race, creed you are, because to be in America is to have to know how to participate in this. And so in my company, there are 0 white people employed by my company, and quarterly we sit down and ask, how is dominant white culture informing how we do our work? Because no one here gets to get a free pass on that, because I participate in whiteness as a Black person every day, right? Because it is the gesso of our nation, it's the gesso of our world. And that just is. It's not even like, and now I'm gonna also tie a negative connotation to it. If we could get, and we'll do some work on this, interrogating whiteness as a social construct, which is not the same thing as me interrogating Jonathan for being a white man. You see the difference? And where the fallout comes is, when we have these conversations, it feels like I'm doing this, or really I'm interrogating this. But if you don't have any practice in how to do this interrogation of a social construct, it will all feel quite personal, right? So that's the gesso. And then I love this too, Kim, because it's step back, which we do all the time. We agree to disagree. That's a code for stepping back. We apologize. Oftentimes we don't even know why we're saying we're sorry. We're saying it to get out of the conversation. We have a hard stop. That's code for I gotta get out of here. Like we have all kinds of ways to do stepping back. We don't have language for admiring someone's view. In the Jewish faith tradition, there is a dynamic.
Regardless of vaccination status, if you do not wear a mask, you will be
there is a dynamic or process called maklokit. And maklokit basically means that if Carissa and I have something we're working on, I see it this way, she sees it that way, and now we're just kind of like stuck. We can take it to the elders, but here's the caveat. When I come, I have to say what is valuable and noteworthy and laudable about Carissa's perspective first, before I can say, and this is why my thing works, right? And when she comes, I hope that's the right pronoun. When she comes, then she has to say what she really appreciates and values about the work I'm doing and bringing to the table. Typically, what that dynamic produces, beyond a better appreciation of our thoughts and ideas, is some amendment to my work or your work that brings us closer to a third way or a fifth way. So it gets you out of this binary way of being, where it's either me or Carissa, and now you got to take sides, and now we got the meeting before the meeting, rallying the troops of who's got the votes and all the things, right? And so this admiration of one's view is not just like a really nice, kind, gentle way of being, and then we go back into our posturing. It really is a way to do the work well. And that's why we have to do the work, because admiring each other's views is a part of DEI work, and it really does inform how we can create policy together. Okay? Other comments on the song? Yes. Wow.
Well, I actually wrote down the exact same line, step back into my review. I think because the first time I listened to the song in our first session, I really right on a single line, and this time I decided to kind of sit back and listen to the melody, and that line just kind of stands out, just the way he kind of rests on that one line. So I really, I think, focused on that, and took from the perspective of him saying, look at what I see through my lens, and going back to what I said earlier about different lenses and looking at what individuals have created in their own vision.
And I think sometimes in our haste, and we'll talk about how time is a social construct that forms all these other things. In our haste, we think we've heard it already before, right? A couple weeks ago, I asked a close person in my life, what are you looking for? And the person was like, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this. And then over the course of a week, they were just like doing this really nitpicky stuff. And I was like, what are you looking for? And the person was like, I already answered you, I'm looking for this. And I was like, no. Like in this behavior you're doing, what are you trying to find? What are you seeking that may not even be there? I asked the exact same question. I meant completely two different things. And this person's initial response was, I already answered your question. And I'm like, but you didn't, because I'm asking a completely different question now, right? And if we can maintain a posture of curiosity, we can say something like, well, what do you mean by that, right? Or can you say more about that? And it helps to give nuance. Also, in this world where we're taking in so much information, if I literally am asking you again, it is credible that I just need you to tell me again so I can hear it a different way, right? And how even in this song, step back and admire my view, 5 times, step back and admire my view, step back and admire my view, step back and admire my view. That's not happenstance. Gregory Porter does that because sometimes we got to go back and look at it again, and we got to look at it again, and we got to look at it with the objective of changing the lens, right? Rather than the objective of finding the next way that I can decimate that point, right? Any final thoughts on this? Yes.
Just the second time through, I was listening more closely to the music. I'm a musician, so I was looking at the words because I thought that's probably what was most important. And the first time through, the business about I'm a canvas and I can sit back and just be a canvas, or I can not like my canvas, but I didn't create it, so it's not my fault. my teachers or my parents or God or whatever. But then I step back and admire, can you use the colors I choose? And then on the other second, I realized that the pronoun changed. Can I use the colors I choose? And I think that's, for me, and the music shifted a little bit in there too. And that's the most important line to me, because that means I have to be proactive and recognize that I'm a canvas, but I can change my hues.
Yeah, and like depending on how I'm holding power in my body, and depending on where I'm geographically located, and depending on who else is in the room, is the difference between can you use the colors versus can I use the colors. And am I paying attention enough to my context and the conditions around me to ask myself, who should be holding the paintbrush right now? Right? Because there are moments when it should be in my hand. And ask my daughters, if you don't believe me, there are moments when I should not be holding it. They make sure I know all of those moments. You know? That yes, we're younger, but don't we get to paint something too? Right? And sometimes, yes, you have a voice as young people. Can I also use the paintbrush? There is also wisdom in the room. Right? And how do you navigate that unless you're talking about it? Because in this instance, they may be saying that I'm practicing adultism or ageism. I might be saying that I just don't even feel humanized. My experience isn't being validated or appreciated. I got 40-something years here. They got to be worth something. So both of these things now actually have credibility. And now we have mock little kids, right? And how does that change the way we do our work together? Not just in this building, but across down this road. Are we looking at the context to determine who should be holding the brush? Who should be making the choices in terms of the colors? And stepping back and admiring the view helps us to get a better sense of that, because it is not static. Is dynamic. The answers to these questions is always informed by context and conditions. And so we have been we've been conditioned toward finality, especially in spaces like this. Once we make a policy or a statement or a bylaw, that's it, right? It's the worship of the written word or printed text as a part of dominant culture. It's this progressive idea that we finish things and leave them, and they become steeped in tradition, and then you can't touch them. It's all of those things that we've been conditioned and indoctrinated into that keep us from revisiting and reconsidering. We've been conditioned to see that as negative because it feels like we're going backwards. I'm even timid sometimes to play this more than once because it's like, oh gosh, who's going to think I'm unprepared? But see how much more deeply we get to go because we step back and admired it from a different perspective, right? That is the courageous work of living into these elements. Anything else here? So I want to give you all an opportunity to do some talking together as well. So we talked a little bit about the importance of developing a common and shared language. We talked about reasons why it's important to do that within the library, across staff, but also across Downers Grove. And typically how we think that works is we have a glossary of terms, right? Somebody puts a sheet in front of us, and we all look at the sheet, we all read the definitions, and then we all just decide, this is what these words mean. So let's try it. We got 3 biggies here: diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm gonna read them out loud like we do in middle school. Diversity is the practice or quality of having a wide range of people who are different from one another in their ethnic background, educational status, ability, age, gender, sexual orientation, economic status, perspective, worldview, and/or lived experience. Equity is the redistribution of power, resources, and access as a means to equalizing the races and leveling the playing field between historically intentional traditionally marginalized people groups and their white counterparts. Inclusion, space, and opportunities that are accessible to historically intentional traditionally marginalized people groups, created to meet their expressed felt needs and where they are respected and appreciated as valuable members of the group. So I'm going to be quiet for 2 minutes. I want you to look at these definitions, and then we're going to have a conversation about their credibility. When you read it, while you're reading them and taking them in, I want you to be vetting for if you 100% agree with the definition of each of the 3. As you read it, is this a definition you're on board with 100% as it is? Take a couple minutes to look that over and process. All right, let's take a look at the first one. Raise your hand if you completely 100% buy into this definition of diversity. Raise your hand if you're all in.
It's hard to ever buy in 100% to anything, but I think I do.
98%.
I think I do. I want to add a few words to the list of them.
Uh-huh.
Based
Anybody like, Banana?
I think I do. I mean,
Yeah. Anybody opposed? All right. What about equity? Anybody opposed to this definition? I wrote it. Okay, say more. Why are you opposed?
The word that makes me pause is the word redistribution.
Okay, say more, Watson.
I think it's the idea that there's like a finite amount of something that has to be shuffled around that almost, I think, defines where people struggle with the idea of programming or EDI in general, is the idea that my people have to lose something for another group to gain something.
Do you think that there is no redistribution that happens in the process of achieving equity? Or that it should include things other than redistribution as well? You see what I'm asking?
Yeah, I would say I'm stumped a little bit.
yeah, I think for me, it's that idea of leveling the playing field, because I don't think it's, like, we level and that means nothing, because the people who are already here are already still here, and when we level them, what do? We just make them, do you know what I mean? For me, it's like, how do you redistribute, really do it? Like, to me, it just sounds pretty, but it's not truly, like, you can't truly equalize until it's the redistribution of the power, and I don't, so I feel like there's like a justice piece that's missing, or something, there's something missing from it that I think is making it not be true equity.
Kim, and then David.
For me, the word white really stood out because I'm a corporate woman who's been trying to really level the playing field. And so it really wasn't white for me, or maybe LGBTQ might not feel as much as white. My grandmother was illiterate, they were as poor as could be. You know, like, she wouldn't have anything as a white person to redistribute to someone. Or even Jewish was another one that came to mind. I'm not Jewish, but their counterpart is not white. So I just thought if the word wasn't there, it'd just be with their counterparts for other people of different ethnicity backgrounds.
David.
Sure how to phrase it, but I almost looked at that definition as being more a definition of equality rather than equity. When I think of equity, the word that always comes to my mind is fairness. Not equality. People are not going to be equal. Shouldn't be equal. We're not equal. But fairness. I'm a member of a Rotary Club, and one of the principles of Rotary is one of the questions that you're supposed to always ask in a decision: is it fair to all concerned? And the word white jumps out at me also because, I'm white, and I acknowledge that, but I have been in situations where I felt that the situation was not equitable because of some non-white things. So I think singling out white is an issue. Those are the issues.
Anybody else?
The other missing components you touched on religion and economic status, but ability.
Well,
Also-
historically, intentionally, traditionally, marginalized people groups would represent all of those voices.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's
Even
more
using
single.
the phrase leveling the playing field.
Yeah. It's ableist, isn't it?
It's able.
Absolutely it is.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Kim's like, that's a whole.
Can one of you who understands that point explain it to me? Because I don't understand the leveling the playing
If
field.
you were disabled,
Yeah.
she's saying that.
You may not even be able to get on the playing field.
You wouldn't be
Okay,
able to
okay, I understand, okay.
It was an analogy, and it
And we use this terminology all the time. I used to talk about blind spots all the time. until I got a particular client whose primary focus is disability advocacy. And then I stopped doing that real quick. Ed used the term gap.
Yeah, I almost used it, and then I remember what you said.
Yeah, well, it happened to me right before I turned off, so I'm only 2 steps behind you. Which is what, I mean, I do this work for a living. You're never gonna perfect your capacity. We don't even call ourselves a firm anymore. We got rid of the language because we're not firm on anything, including definition. We are a consulting practice, which means that we're practicing like everyone else. We spend more time and attention on it, but we're all practicing to be better, right? The other part, just to further complicate the definition, between historical intention, tradition, marginalized people groups, I see myself here, and their white counterparts. I see myself here. If we're talking about whiteness as a social construct, I'm not off that hook either. What do I need to think about redistributing as a person of means, comparatively speaking? I become part of the white counterparts. If you're looking at it as a social construct and not as an embodiment based on skin color, right? That just changed the whole definition, didn't it? So friends, here's the thing. We could do this for 9 more hours. Why? Because I just told you part of my story, and Swapna told a story, David told a story, Fernanda told a story, Kim told a story. Like, I know about something pertaining to your work, and, you know, I know about you being a part of Rotary, right? I know things about you. But I didn't know before. And in some ways, that is developing the common shared language, right? I don't want you to get into the binary space of like, either we have a glossary of terms or we don't because we can't agree on the terminology. But what we don't want to miss in this process is what just happened because we wrestled with the terms. So we should never develop the glossary of terms and put it on the website and hand it out in the library, and then it becomes the thing, because the reality is I set a glossary of terms in front of you, and based on our lived experiences, we accepted or rejected only parts of each one so far. We didn't do inclusion. Because our lived experiences will always inform our definitions, whether somebody gives us a concretized, printed version of something or not. And the more you've participated in being a HIT MPG, the less credible that document probably is. Like, I'll basically read it and internalize the meaning of it in a way that allows me to effectively code switch. Okay, this is the code they want me to learn. Got it. I don't think any of this is the definition, but okay. Right? But when I say, Pranali, why do you struggle with this? And when I ask Flosman, she's like, it's the redistribution for me. That's rooted in a scarcity mindset. What if we did equity work from a more abundant place? I'm like, oh, friend, let's talk about that. But we would have voted differently on whether or not this should be our definition, and then we would have spent the next 2 hours of the board meeting mitigating that, instead of having this conversation that helps me to see it's not that she's voting against equity at all. She literally wants a more expansive definition, right? And so how do we hold that tension? Well, we develop our policies and we develop our bylaws. And because glossaries of terms and policies and bylaws, they all kind of help to develop some structure and cohesion that we need as an institution. But we have caveats, friends, for these documents. You know, caveats that say that they were developed by human frailties, and that as such, we will continue to morph as learners and practitioners in DEI. And that because of that, you can expect that there will be tensions in how we've been definitive about this. And we're more interested in the narratives and the stories that come as a result of documenting anything about it than we are married to the glossary of terms itself. Right? Any questions or comments about what I just shared? Thoughts questions about this? Yes, Marissa?
I think the challenging part about having a glossary kind of, any wording, as we found out at the last board meeting, is that every word needs its own glossary. So even if we go back to redistribution, every one of those, except for maybe and dog.
Yeah.
You could have this conversation, and the understand, and I really like to use about understanding the stories behind people's perspectives of those words as a way of continuing the conversation without necessarily putting a pin in it.
Yes.
Yes. That's not a perspective we considered before, so thank you.
And because we use words to communicate a lot of really horrible things, all the words have been used for things that have negative connotations, and all of the words are tied to the traumas in our lives. We use those words to communicate the traumas, right? So now we see the words and it's triggering for different reasons with different people. Like, how do we just say that somewhere? How do we name and acknowledge the triggering, traumatic nature of attempting to come to common and shared language, and the idea that we will courageously continue to strive toward it by way of narrative sharing and conversations and relationship building. Now, you put that at the top in the italicized paragraph, and then when people come to fight with people up the glossary terms, you just send them back to that paragraph. And they'll still come back again, and then you say, so what are some of the words that are giving you angst? And then they answer that question with what? A story. And then we get to listen to each other's stories. And then we say, maybe these are the words then. Because these words, as imperfect and harmful as they have been and can still be, they're what we have in order to communicate in your relationship and community, and that's what we really want to be about. What we typically do, because our dominant culture way of being tells us to defend it, right? So now we have to come up with ways to make these words the right words, right? When Swatman got on redistribution, I was like, well, somebody's going to lose something, right? That's my innate, I even knew what the exercise was, I still did, right? Because our innate conditioning, our wiring, is to defend the things we've worked hard and are passionate about. But I then pulled back from my innate mechanic way of responding and said, tell me more about how you're feeling about redistribution. And what I heard is it's rooted in a scarcity mindset, a scarcity mentality. Couldn't we as creative beings just make more? And I'm like, well, yeah, absolutely we could, right? And sometimes we can, and sometimes we feel like we can't. Like, I'm like, just make more when you look at the budget. Just make more. Sorry, friends. And so how do we operate within the gap, Jen, between the ideal and the actual, right? Ideally, we will pull out this glossary of terms. We'll all see it the same way. It'll be heaven on earth. The meeting will be short, and we'll just move on based on what we believe about these terms collectively. Actually, your lived experiences will always inform how you define language. And the more diverse the more it becomes, the more lived experiences you're going to have present here. And the more diversity you have, the harder it will be to come to a glossary of terms that is 100%. My first question, I was like, everybody, Jonathan's like 100%, I don't know about this. I don't know where to say 100%, right? And so as you're more diverse, that number will get smaller and smaller because your lived experiences will be broader and broader, right? So what would happen if we stopped having the expectation that we were ever going to get to 100% agreement on what all of these terms mean? That feels hard to let go of, but it's probably more realistic. That we're not even trying to get to the place where we all see these terms exactly the same way. Because I'm going to tell you what happens. Then we spend the next 3 board meetings mitigating terminology, and our agency we have not left the ground. In terms of actual allyship, hidden PGs are still standing outside the door like, what they doing in there? I think they still talk about the terms we're gonna use to talk about the stuff we're gonna do, right? They wanna feel the transformative presence of equity in the library. We're mitigating the terms. And so I think it's important to have the conversations we just had, not so that we can have the goal of having the same terms, but so we can better understand each other's understandings of those terms, and then put a caveat that lets people know that was the actual aim. It's culture shifting. It changes the game, and that's very much in line with what the library should be doing, right? Any questions or comments about this?
One question on terms that just came to mind now. But sometimes I wonder, does someone want to be called Black or African American? Because different people think differently on that. Or would you like to be called Indian or Asian, right? And so when you're trying to not like offend, then I guess like when BIPOC came out, that was a new term this year, or in 2020. I had never heard it before then. And I guess that just like all encompassing, and that helped.
And I can't stand that term.
I don't know.
So to your point, Kim,
Yeah,
right?
see,
Like
yeah.
I do, and I use it regularly. I cannot stand it, and I use it, and that's exactly the point I'm making. That there are no good words left. And to your point, Kim, about do I say Hispanic? Do I say Latina? Do I say I know to say? And then if I say Latina, but you don't identify as female, if I say Latino, but you don't, and so now I say Latinx, but you don't like because Hispanic, right? And so, Kim, you named the goal, which is to try not to offend anybody. The goal is not to not offend anybody. It is to try not to offend anybody.
But then you do lose some of your chance to have a relationship and try to better understand if there was offense taken.
Yeah, possibly. It's risky business. I'm gonna say that a million more times. I think in the cases where it's like Black or African American, I'll say a couple things. I identify as Black with a capital B. I wrote a book that I can't remember the name of, Vacation. Soul Force. I was like, really, Rashida? It's yours. Soul Force, 7 Pivots to Courage, Community, and Change. And when I was writing the manuscript, I capitalized the B throughout the entire manuscript. The publisher sent me the edits and changed all the B's to lowercase. I corrected it and sent it back to the editors, and then they called me, and I was like, this is not changing, friends. This is not going to change. We won't have a book, but this is not going to change. And so, well, for them, they had precedence because there have been other Black authors who had tried, and they wouldn't let them do it. So then I couldn't, and I was like, I don't, it's not going to change. And so what they did was they changed the policy. Hello, friends. That from that, they couldn't do anything about what was behind us, but we could do something about what's ahead of us. And so now that whole publishing house, you can use Black with a capital B, right? But they called me and they were like, Rashida, are you willing to die on this hill? And I was like, yup. But you already took the advance. I was like, that's hard on me, but yeah, also still yes, right? But we had this conversation, why is it important to you? And then I told the story of my grandmother. I told the stories of why this definition was important to me. It wasn't me willing to die on the hill. It wasn't me changing it. We were like literally clicking back and forth for a while, changing the edits. It was the stories I told where 2 people on the executive team cried and was like, I can't support this now. Like, I can't. It's through the stories. So when you want to know, you can say, I don't know your story,
And I don't think I should have it any sooner than you're willing to give it to me. But knowing it will help me to know better, how do I call you? Like, who can fight with that posture, right? When people feel like you're trying to extract their souls, then they're like, don't call me anything, right? I'm just trying to perfect my allyship. I just want to know how to do it right. And you're a project that will help me know. And like, no, don't call me anything. Call me tomorrow, right? But when you're like, I want to know you, but I don't want to get ahead of what you want me to know, can you help me know what is appropriate for me to know? Oh my gosh, I wish that would happen to me, but I want those words so badly. Because it intimates a desire without being heavy-handed. And maybe you just call me my name for a little while, right? Until we can get enough traction to have these other kinds of conversations. You can even say, I know that it's rooted in dominant culture to always want the definitive answer. So I don't want you to feel like I'm looking for the answer. This is really about honoring your humanity, because that's really what I want. What honors your humanity? These are the words that people are like, have been waiting for their whole lives, you know. But if you walk up to me and you're like, now are you Black or African American? I'm just like, I get paid to do this. I can't right now, you know. And so really a lot of this is about how we hold tenderness. And these are words that nobody ever says in a boardroom, right? But it is what will help us to have more dialogue and conversation about these kinds of words so that we can have the deeper conversations, right? Other questions about this? I'm feeling that Julie is telling me to take a break part. It's literally an energy now. So we can let's take 10 minutes. When we come back, we're going to do an exercise for you to practice this, and then we'll move into the next segment. Let's take 10 minutes.
Squeeze.
No, I don't see that.
That's fine.
All right.
We're good.
Reminder.
Thank you. Thank goodness you had paper towels. That's fine. Water now.
Yep.
Stay out of my way.
That's right. No technology will harm
Very carefully.
So these are Ibram Kendi's definitions. I say that on purpose because he knows more weight than I do. I just want us to do a little bit of an exercise around these two terms. I don't like either of these, and I love Ibram Kendi. He wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist. I know you all have been engaged in that text. And, well, first of all, my English professor self doesn't like when you use the word in the definition. It's not helpful. So a word, racist, is a word used to describe a person, people, group, or idea that in action or expression values racial hierarchy over racial equality. Anti-racist, a person who is actively participating in the tension of obliterating racism by equalizing the races in the private, internal, interpersonal, and public life. Okay. I want you to take a look at both of those. Pick one, so we don't have time for you to do both. Choose one. decide if you agree with the definition or you take qualm with it. And then tell us a story that informs why you agree with it or why you don't think it's a good definition. Give us some story from your life that helps us better understand where your support or qualm with one of these definitions is informed by your life experience. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to reflect on it. You can even write about it if you want, if that's how you process. And at the end of those 5 minutes, we're going to share some of these stories in small groups. Part of my objective is to continue the work we're doing on developing a common shared language. And part of the objective is for you all to get to know each other better, because there are no real structures in place for that in the traditional board meeting structure. Let's take 5 minutes. You're going to choose one, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, and then choose a story from your life that informs your agreement or disagreement with the definition you chose. Let's take 5 minutes to do that now. Two more minutes. Okay. So now we'll have this side of the room work together. And then we'll have this side of the room work together. And then Jonathan, the people work in the back of the table in the gym. And you can go in if you like. You're really in charge.
If you dare.
What I want you to do is each of you take about 3 to 5 minutes to name which definition you picked, whether you agree or disagree with it, as stated, and then tell a story from your life that informs why you agree or support it or disagree or don't support it. The other two people in the group are listening actively to the story, and then you can ask curious questions, but each person only gets up to 5 minutes, and then you swap to the next person. So this is a 15-minute exercise. Do you have any questions about what's happening? All right, let's hop to it. 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll go first. The story that and so the reason I disagree with it is because I don't necessarily dump them on racial hierarchy or racial equity or racial equality. I see there's other issues that seem to like focus on kind of the hierarchy. And the story behind it is so I worked with this client who ran this company in DC. And he did a lot within his company to promote minorities and for people in very powerful positions across his company. He actively took those steps. And so from kind of that perspective, he's at almost become but at the same time, I remember I was having dinner with him. This is something that kind of set me up. He had 2 daughters, and he said, I've told them there's only 2 things. They can marry anyone they want. But it can't be one. Like, that was like, that to me, like, regardless of like these other factors, he's not concerned about like the hierarchy, or at least that's not my perception. It's like, it's still, it's racist.
Right, that's not what I'm saying.
So that's why, like, I just think there's things beyond like people focusing on like the racial identity. It's almost like people go, or whatever. It's like focused on like, oh, are they good? Are they being more powerful? Or not? They just don't want minorities around, which is a different, thing. And that's what he did. Essentially.
You could be the person who makes downstairs so, like, and I when I used to do that, very careful, like, my grandmother, my aunt, I don't think, but I don't think she lost, I mean, so it's not about overcame that sort of like, so something about conversation, I'm mixed right, I can like whatever she has to say.
Just, and not
Right, no, I mean, no.
but that's, it's almost just,
I have never thought
seems like a right. Well, when I was thinking about earlier, when she was talking about,
well, yeah, like,
or I think it was context. Kids have, especially really kids, pretty first year, they don't think about it. They don't talk about it. They don't address it. And so I always think, like, understanding how to go about they don't talk about it. Like, they just don't, they're just like, I'm your friend. And, and that's it. And so they're not, nothing, there's nothing weird about it at all. And so, I think that's my general approach.
The thing I'm trying to
Not focus on it. Do the best.
Good part of my
Okay, so.
very valid. And I'm trying to ask myself, why? I know a whole lot of people who are actively participating. And yet I don't usually call themselves anti-racist. I've got one month on me, and I guess I shouldn't necessarily think if I were racist. That's a pretty good definition. Racial hierarchy. It didn't exist. And I like it's a good definition. Unnecessarily. I don't know the story. When I was fairly young, my
That's
father.
about 9 minutes left.
My father grew up in Mississippi. My great grandfather was a Civil War general. Owned plantations and all that sort of thing. The plantation's still there. As a little kid, I would go down there and find this very happy to there some questions. And conversation was fine. Very, really determined racist. I wouldn't call him an anti-racist.
Right.
I actually, one of the last things, And there was
discrimination because of Black Lives Matter movement. So how much movements really taken away from change
a
over
lot of things were sort of
not because they weren't supportive of
And
it, I think.
I started
I just don't
thinking one
think
day,
focus on displays. That's usually, yes, I agree with that. He is taking the learning not necessarily to equalize others to their
and he was starting to explain to me why he didn't use this language. Why? So granted, this is 1950s or 60s or something. But even at that time, I couldn't get my arms around the fact that he was saying, first place, my father tried to teach me that
If you look at any race, there's so much like disparity between like the white
His wife's
or
more
black race. I mean, so,
with this
and I mean, this is just
and
not knowing.
I'm always fixated
What about equalizing?
trying to change his mind.
Right.
And why is it just
But
about equalizing?
I'm not sure how it all played out.
Right. It's like the economic argument too.
Yeah.
It's like if you have,
But sometime later,
and this is like, but like people who have access to like education, opportunities, it almost like, now it.
no one would know, but he has the title
Right.
of knowledge,
But it's not always the case.
Right.
who was essentially saying the same thing.
So, no, the thing I was thinking about when reading those definitions of too is the fact that,
And
like, I don't know what the percentage is, but let's say there's 10% racist, 10% anti-racist, the people who are actively anti-racist.
Yes.
And then like, as a reality, it's like, well, where do they, because you're not either, I think most people don't fit within one of those two categories.
even when
You're not actively,
support.
yeah.
For being in racial, I guess that's the, I don't know, racial thing that I never felt racial person, like, it was very much definition of person.
I mean, I can support that.
I was thinking about people that I know, like, people who are actually like in their daily interaction with somebody.
No.
I mean, I just know that I like at times, and then I mean, I'm like push parents, like just
How about 5 minutes?
You know, and
it's really it's kind of like their house burned down. They're like invited them to live with them, and they live with them for like so it's like people who are like free. They're like, you know what I mean? Like build the, you know, all this stuff. It's like, but then like they actually. It's part of it, other than I'm like, proud of my parents.
I think they have, who are not vetted as a teacher or don't do it properly or legally.
Well, this too, I think this too, like a lot of it is, if you, it's racist and daily interactions with people who are not like race. I mean, when I started law school, one of my first like real friends was Muslim. And I'm like, I've been talking to these people like my whole life. I never know one, you know, and then like, I'm here and he's totally normal. He's like teaching me how to use it. You know, like, this is like random things. Yeah.
So it's like, but then you have to ask some serious questions. This is what I always do this, I spend a lot of time on this. It's like, are you a racist or different? So, is that racist? I'm not, no, I'm not sure if I know the answer to that question. But you know what I'm saying? That, that's not a racist, because I mean, this is protecting our
something undercover.
Right, is that a racial thought that you
Yeah.
have?
Oh, no,
Or-
and I would say that I use it as like a easy
Yes.
example, like, but my parents, over the like last
You know, like I
number
can
of
be
years,
better, but
they would come across
I see tons of
literally just don't like
Right.
and that's just like, that's the perception you get in being with them and being open, and the fact that like, they hear racist, and then in actuality, I mean, what more can you do than having like a Mexican stay in your house? I mean, and so that's why there's like, I just feel like there's sometimes in this situation, I personally, there's obviously huge, there's a lot of words are important, but to me, like the steps that you take, so like actually alleviate, like, you know, the systemic issues, like, that's, to me, maybe, bigger pieces, like programming, and things like that.
I feel like I put so much
Yeah.
just like your videos, they have this you have traditions and notions that, you know, you were taught to not like them,
Yeah.
whatever it is. But then you meet somebody at a personal level, it's just like, they're just like students.
Right.
They got the same I mean,
Here's another story.
yeah, right, it's like,
Recently, it's
no relationship,
about 6
that's
years
like,
ago,
that's like,
so
you know,
3 weeks, spending most of the time in the
Did you guys have this one at the library?
And it's just saying, people,
How do you like avoid political discussion in the library?
it's not allowed, she said so.
Okay.
She said so, she said no political chatter in the library.
No, that was just a
You get in trouble if you do. It is just like, yeah, we have to send out people to the library, send out email checks. Because it can get very heated, or it's that. But there's no problem. Go outside, it was horrible for a while. Guys, do that.
Right.
Do it here. Do you want communities? But I think it's
Right.
also-
and all economic. And they were trying, many of them were trying to
Any other?
they thought that I
There's
could.
this little picture. I gotta walk my dogs and I just sit there.
Where does,
Keelan's gotta go where she's from.
where do you, which school district are you at?
and he was also positive.
Okay.
Being,
Like, saying,
experience, being in that board.
It's a great area. It's like, I live right on the site, we live at, basically Main and 55th, and so we go down there all, like, in our, we used to play like the 55th Diane Main Park right there, and so.
So, okay.
No, I really,
Yeah.
I actually moved here in 2000.
oh, we had to do that tomorrow.
Even though one.
I know.
All right, it was nice
All right,
chatting.
friends, we have time.
You stay with our group?
Yes, please, stay with your girls. And before we launch into the details, I guess I've had more time to reflect on your experience than you. After I was walking around. What do you notice? What did you notice? Any impressions?
Can you be more specific? Like, what do you mean?
That you can literally say whatever you
Oh,
noticed. Whatever bubbled up or resonated or something you happened to pay attention to differently about the experience in the group. Anything?
I don't think that Kim and I have ever had a conversation with each other like that, like we just did, right?
That's a good noticing.
And you're still friends, right?
I don't know. It worked out. I hope it worked out. Julie's like, I don't think you should come next time.
Make sure they don't sit next to me.
Yeah, right. What else did you notice?
Well, I would say that, I mean, I learned something about Dave's family history, Chris's work history, and things that in all the meetings we've had, I didn't know.
And how could you have? Right? What else? Notice anything else?
Well, I guess I learned a little bit like I have, with the exception of little short snippets here and there, I have not personally experienced this. You know, I was hearing a story about what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
First
So,
person.
go ahead, David.
No, I just said first person.
First, yeah. So you're called to make policy about something you've never experienced. How's that supposed to go? Right? So we're potentially making policy about something we've not experienced. This is why the whole body is important, because some of you haven't, or some of you have, right? And you need that mix because some patrons haven't and some patrons have. You're called to be one body with people you've never had an opportunity to connect with in this way. How is it possible? So you're developing your own answer to why. Because I could give you a canned answer to why are you doing this, just like I could give you canned glossary terms, but you're developing the reasons why this work has to happen by doing the work yourself right now. These are the reasons why. Because I can't make policy with people I don't know. I think that's a bad idea. Because there are experiences I've never had that I can't embody as a Board of Trustee member without having conversations with people who have had experiences I've never had. This is your answer to why you have to do the work. Other impressions, noticing.
We talked a little bit about dictionary definitions and who wrote the dictionary, you know, who gets to define that term.
Can I have some say what you use? And I think I'm gonna flip the script and do characteristics of white supremacy first. I'm still deciding if we're doing that or victim oppressor, but this idea that because it is printed, it is so. And the longer it's been printed, the more important it is. So Merriam-Webster, like that is the jam, except that there are words that we now have that we use that weren't even words back then. And there are human beings who weren't even seen as human back then. So there's no way those folks were taken into account when those definitions were created. So you're literally like, here's a round hole. All you square pegs, find your way into these definitions and this language. When people ask me, what is the research that your work is predicated on? I say 46 years of being Black and woman in America. And if that does not suit you, then I'm just not the right person. And it's not because I don't have dual degrees. The point is that is actually not the point, right? That we have to take into account, especially as a library, the beautiful richness and vastness of printed text and hold that in tandem with the beautiful richness and vastness of lived experience. That's why we have to do the work. Yeah. Other noticings and impressions?
We talked with our story. You talked about just like how much the definitions are like labeling, and it kind of doesn't speak to the humanity of people or experiencing that.
Yeah, the dehumanization?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it boxes it all up nicely. So well that nobody fits in the box, right? Yeah. This is what I mean, and Ibram Kendi is a professor, I think, oh boy, I think at Georgetown, don't quote me. But he's in the thing that he's interrogating, if that makes any sense. So nothing he's creating is going to be void of the problems themselves, right? It's like we're not in the ideal, to Jen's point, we're in the actual, and the actual is still wrought with all the things. So you're trying to create a new thing using the old things. And so between what Ed said and what Julie said, if you tie those things together, everything we create in equity is already gonna be fallible. And that ought not to defeat us. It ought to make us humble enough to know we're not gonna perfect it, right? It doesn't have to defeat us, like, well, what's the point if it's all fallible before we start? Well, it was all also fallible before Dr. King started and John Lewis started. But if they hadn't started, I certainly wouldn't be here talking today. So we have to use the pieces we have because there is evidence of growth and change while recognizing the fallibility, which should keep us humble enough to stay curious about what we're doing. Does that make sense? All right. Other noticings, impressions? Did you have enough time? Oh, good. Did you want more time, or maybe this opportunity is closed? Would you want to have another opportunity to do this? Okay.
Can I just mention one thing about the definition of racist, and that, I mean, I don't agree with that definition, but I struggle with the simplicity of the racial hierarchy, because in a structural quadrant, I would say that that is true. However, as it pertains to individuals and interpersonals, I don't think that racial hierarchy really has a lot to do with racism, because I feel like at the individual level, there's so much hatred and fear.
There's so much hatred and fear.
It has nothing to do with hierarchy, but maybe I'm not sure what he means by that. But do you see what I'm saying? It seems like it's...
So it lives inside my body. I could do racial hierarchy all by myself because white supremacy is evidence of racial hierarchy. And if white supremacy informs how I see myself as a person, like if I can't see myself as beautiful because none of my baby dolls looked and sounded like me, that's an exemplar of internal racial hierarchicalism. Does that make sense? I'm literally holding something above something else. And in the example I just gave, I'm holding whiteness as superior or supreme to being a person of color. It can also happen in another way. So it's still racism if, as a white male, I see myself as valuable and noteworthy and laudable, surely by my nature of being white and male, and I don't even think about any other race or gender or ethnicity, that's still racial hierarchy. It's white supremacy. The very nature of it being supreme is prioritization. That's hierarchical, and that you can do that in your body all day. It's the reason why I can be in the airport, this has happened, and I'm standing in the priority line, and a white male will come and just drop his bags in front of me. And I'm like, what's happening here? Friend, what are you doing? Oh, this is priority. And that alone is like all you need. Like, that's it, we're done, you know. And it's not even against me. He literally didn't even register my being because he is the priority. That is internalized racial hierarchy. Does that make sense now, Jen? Yeah. Any other impressions? Oh, did anybody feel anxious when it was like, okay, I'm going to tell a story? Did that feel what I would call disembodied for Nali? Swapna, I heard you say so.
I just feel like it's like, tell us a story now. And I'm not saying that they both did that, but they did. But do you know what I mean? But it's like, that's what, first of all, this is what I do all day. And so I'm always telling a stupid story. And sometimes I'm like, I don't want to have a story. I just want to be able to just, right? Like sometimes it's exhausting to like, have to like open up a wound again and like bare my heart again. And then like tell another story about the awful thing that happened just today, or the thing that my kid came home and said, or the fact that, you know, there's no dolls that look like it. Sometimes it's just exhausting. And so sometimes I don't want to have to tell a story. So I did.
I wonder how the dynamics would have shifted if I had gave all the directions and said, but if you're a person of color, you can opt out of telling a story. And I'm not looking for an answer, because I already know a lot of the answers that will come. Like, ideally, we would be like, well, it would have been fine, but it wouldn't have been fine. It would have been like, well, why don't they have to share? That's the difference between equality and equity, right? And when you don't know the stories, right, David, you're like, this doesn't feel fair. But it's the fairest thing I could do. Give people of color an opportunity to opt out of sharing another story. Not just because you're tired of telling the old stories, but because you'll have new, fresh ones to tell tomorrow. Right? Like I had my story earlier about my niece and my daughter. That's from today, right? Somewhere between talking to Julie earlier and getting here, which was like 7 hours. So when it's that very present in your life all the time, then we have things like affinity groups, and people are like, why do we need to have those? That's why we need to have those. That's why we need to have spaces where people could be like, in this space we don't tell stories. We get to not tell stories in this space. Or we get to tell them from a more liberative space, or we get to tell them without it feeling voyeuristic, right? And so as we think about how we are developing policies and how we're doing internal staffing and how we're doing professional development, this room of folk is responsible for making those decisions. And if you don't understand or haven't had the experience of having to tell a story every day, or having to live a fresh one multiple times a day, then you won't understand why we're doing this, right? You won't understand why it's being raised up as a part of the professional development plan to have affinity groups or to have coaching for particular members of the team, hit MPG members of the team, when non-hit MPG folks aren't getting that benefit. That's not fair, right? So these are the nuances that will never inform your decision-making, your policy creation, your bylaw amendments, your votes, because it's literally in your gap. It's the place where you can't fully grasp what's happening. And that's the reason why we have to make room for people like Renali and Swapna to freeze frame and say, so I have this language of calling people up and calling people in rather than calling people out, because nobody wants to be called out. Nobody needs to be shamed and embarrassed on top. We feel bad enough that we're still making these mistakes. I do, right? Blind spots. What am I doing? I own a whole company that's about this life, right? It's hard. But if you call me up, calling somebody up means you know them well enough to say, I know how you typically are, and today I don't see you showing up that way. I'm calling you literally to rise to the occasion of who I know your best self to be, right? My mom can call me up whether I want her to or not. She just, my goodness, she knows all the ways, right? Because she knows my very best self. That requires relationship, proximity, a lot of time and investment to call somebody up. To call somebody in is to develop a close, like where you can't call me up because you really don't know me. Like Renali doesn't really know me, right? I don't really know Renali. But I can call her in that like I want to develop a deeper relationship and this feels a little off and I don't want it to be off. So can we get, because you know we step back. Remember we got all the ways to step back. Calling somebody in creates proximity and closeness, as uncomfortable as that might feel, toward a greater way of being together. These are two ways to be in the discomfort without it being like rooted in my wokeness and pulling somebody else's woke card, right? Because if you don't believe that it doesn't work, just read any social media any day. people just get off to the races and it's just a big fight. And nobody's growing. Everybody's getting a lot of stuff off their chest, right? But calling people up and calling people in are two ways to help each other grow, and it's rooted in the extent to which you have relationship. These moments, like the one you just had, are what create the space for later being able to call people up and in. If you don't do this stuff, no matter how nice you try to sound when you say it, you call it out. You still call. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude to you, but I'm going to be rude to you. Why? Because we don't have the relational fabric for you to say to me what you're about to say to me. And then I'm going to be defensive because we don't have the relational fabric to have the conversation. So if you're not calling up or you're not calling in, no matter how polite you try to make it sound, you're probably calling the person out. Caveat. Hidden PGs who have been harmed or oppressed by something need to be able to say what they need to be able to say, right? And that's the uses of anger, right? That's the, you are harming me. I can't be so concerned about your feelings being hurt that I allow myself to suffocate under the weight of an oppression, right? And so the more power we hold, the more room we have to make to be in a place where a hit MPG can say what needs to be said without having to do like a 10-point plan on how to get a proverbial boot off my neck. So I have to see, in my company, I'm the CEO. I laugh all the time, because it's supposed to be the most powerful seat in the place. Mickey really has the most power. But I have to register that power, and then if somebody sounds frustrated, then I have to be willing to sit with that towards the greater transformation, because I may be doing something oppressive because corporate and capitalism, like if you own a company, is in there somewhere, right? So can I hold that in a space of responsibility, maturity, and wisdom to just hear what the harm is and not get so caught up on the frustration or the anger that I can't hear the thing that I actually have the capacity to do something about, right? I'm the one who could probably make this better. And so there's not going to be any like black and white binary things. It's like literally calling up and calling in our tools, but also if I'm holding a lot of power, I can't always call up, be like, you didn't call me up or in. I feel like you're calling me out. I might be doing something that needs to be kind of called out a little bit. So how do we do that dance of understanding where we are in it all to make it make sense? Any questions or thoughts about that? Because in my meetings, I have all the ideas all the time. I got all the ideas. And so I literally will intentionally defer sharing to make room for what they don't like about what's on the table or why this doesn't make any sense and all this stuff. Because I can give my ideas, nobody's ever going to stop me. So how do I make room for somebody else to call something up or in or out? Because I hold the most power, so I have to subject myself to some of that more frequently. And what does that look like at a boardroom table? And it's complicated because you got this person who's been here for this long doing this work, so there's wisdom there. And you got this person, and they're hidden PG. The issue on the table is related to hidden PGs. This, right? Like, there's a lot of dynamics. Well, you stop and you name them. You just stop and you just say what the things are. And Julie will tell you, I do it all the time. We were in a meeting one time, and there was some things going on because we had DEI training and people were still sorting some stuff out. And I could just feel it on the Zoom from Atlanta. I was like, what is happening here? And we stopped. And we were like, there's a dynamic. What is the dynamic? Naming the dynamic led to the conversation that helped us to respond to it so that we could move on in a way that made sense for more people to be moving on. So I think I want to, I was going to do victim oppressor, but I think I'm going to do characteristics of whiteness first. Because that is the thing you will, it's the thing you will most frequently need to call up and call in about. So if you're like, well, I'm white, I've been white my whole life, I don't know what these things are that you're talking about, it's like the air I breathe. So how can I even know when I'm doing it if I've only ever done it and it's been called professional, articulate, smart, standard, tradition, normative. We have tons of words, code words for upholding whiteness. And so if all those words sound like what you're supposed to do, so then how can you know when you're doing it? So let's take a look at that. But before we do, any other questions or comments about what you experienced today? And so one thing you can do too when people say, why are we doing this work? You just embody the revelatory elements that come from doing the work that will positively inform the work you do here. Tell those stories as the reason why the work is important. Okay. Last one for tonight. The good news is the last one, the bad news is the heaviest. And much like every other element of this work, this piece is also flawed. There are all kinds of issues around who created it and who was exploited as a result of its creation. I believe at this university. So if you go online to look it up, you'll see that whole narrative too. And it just goes back to how inequity and injustice really touches everything, and that does not preclude DEI and anti-racism work. So I'm going to look at some common characteristics of pervasive white culture that is present in all facets of our lives. And we're going to look at how to interrogate whiteness as a social construct, disconnecting it from white skin and white people. Our hope is that you will be able to better recognize and pivot from these characteristics when they are harmful, and identify these when the traits are present, so that you can counter the pervasiveness of it. Here's what's important. What we are not about to do is name all the characteristics of white supremacy, because that would take all night. We're going to name about 14 or 15 to help you get better acclimated. Here's the other thing I need you to understand. These characteristics in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with them. Nothing. It is when they are upheld in a way that creates punitive and harmful ways of being for people who don't participate in the same pervasive way, that is what creates the problem. Okay? And I'll probably have to say that again as we get into the content. But the elements, the characteristics themselves just are. Okay? So as we go through this last part, what is your personal relationship with the characteristics as we name them? How have you seen these characteristics play out within your organization or your personal life? And how do you contribute? And if you can hear my voice, which includes me, because I can hear my voice, you contribute. Okay? What are some ways you have seen others challenge professional standards at an organization or individual level? Okay. So this is what you need to know. No matter your race, we all participate and are complicit in the upholding of pervasive white culture. These characteristics are damaging to hit MPGs. They are also damaging to white people. Okay? Being able to identify and name the cultural norms and standards that are pervasive is the first step to making room for embracing non-dominant culture and non-dominant cultural experiences. All right, here they all are. At least 14 of them, okay? These show up in our organizations, they show up in our daily lives. These characteristics are damaging because they are used as norms and standards without being proactively named or chosen by the group or us as individuals. They just already are, and everyone's expected to know them and participate in them. And it is damaging and punitive if you don't know how, or if you know how and refuse to. And each one in and of itself is not a bad thing. Having a sense of urgency helps people get to where they need to be on time, right? But it's when the sense of urgency becomes unhealthy, for example, and when it is oppressive, for potentially no good reason at all, because we contrive some deadline and now we're like killing ourselves and each other to meet it, but nothing actually is going to happen. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So all of our T's have to be crossed, all of our I's have to be dotted. If that's not done, it's not a space where we just learn from our mistakes. Like something's gonna happen, heads are gonna roll. Because it wasn't done to the absolute maximal, optimal best. The level of stress that this produces, particularly in non-white people, literally causes health problems. Things like high blood pressure, hypertension, diabetes, anxiety, and it also causes all of those health problems for white people who are upholding it as a way of being. So just because you're doing it doesn't mean it's not harming you. Like it's getting all of us, right? The sense of urgency, this false sense of time as definitive. Time is a social construct. The proof of it is that we could drive somewhere, not even 2 hours from here, and it'll be a different time. Go to India, it's a different time. And that we don't use time as a tool, we use it as a weapon, right?
And have your attention, please. The library will be closing in 15 minutes.
And so we use it to be punitive towards other people. We use it to evaluate or place value on human life. Like you ran out of time, or you lost track of time, or you were late, that somehow that is indicative of your value as a person. And that there are places in the world where this thing doesn't exist in this way at all. Defensiveness. We use that as a mechanism to push the punitive away from ourselves towards someone else. It's a way to deflect the punitive nature that comes from this list. We even have a thing built into the list to protect us from the list. That's what defensiveness is here. Quantity over quality. Wherever we are, we need to go further. This idea that, okay, I'll give you this example from my company. We were having a meeting maybe about 6 months ago, talking about expanding our market. And I was like, why are we doing that? And my team was like, because we're a business. And I was like, that's not a reason. I mean, we are a business, that's a fact. But why do we need to expand our market? What's the reason? We could be a business we could be a business without expanding our market reach. And they're like, well, because we want more people to participate in DEI practices. Okay, that's a reason. Why else? Because we don't have enough money to do all the things we want to do yet. Okay, that's a reason. But one day, we might feel like we, as a small company, touched enough lives and we made enough money to do the things. That's why we have to ask the question. We can't just blindly, see, there it is. We can't just randomly decide it's quantity, 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 without even asking why we need more, right? This is how we define growth and development in dominant cultural white, masculine, patriarchal ways of being. It's always more and expand, which sometimes might be important to do. Again, having quantity could just be a thing, but the fact that we don't even question it, and that's just like our rote, knee-jerk reaction to being, that's what makes it supremacist. Worship of the written word, we spend a lot of time talking about it. We do it as it pertains to printed text and books and such. We steep it in tradition. And then also, more presently speaking, we do it with emails even. We're like, well, did you put, so happened. Did you put it in writing? Because if you didn't put it in writing, it didn't happen. And I'm like, no, it definitely happened. I feel it. It happened, right? But it doesn't matter until you document it, right? Here's another example. People who go on vacation, they have to put on an auto reply. Our friends from Caribbean islands are like, you Americans, I don't understand. They'll know you're not there because you're not answering, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, people will break out in hives if you did that at home, right? We have to be documenting where we are, what's going on. This is not everybody's cultural way of being in the world. Some people literally don't know what an auto reply is. They don't know. And if you don't know, we clench our pearls. Like, what do you mean? Because that is holding white cultural way of being above any other way. It's like, what do you mean you don't know? That's exactly what white supremacy is. It's not white hoods and, burning crosses. It's the mundane, everyday practices that we assume everybody has to know, or is something wrong with them. That is what white supremacy on a daily basis looks like. Paternalism, which is rooted in hierarchical power dynamics and power hoarding, which is here. It's this idea that someone must father it. Someone must lead it from a very singular and individual place and make determinants about everything and everybody else. And the further down that chain you go, the less you have to say about it and the less informed you are about it, even though it may be impacting you the most. That's what paternalism is. Okay? Either or thinking or binary thinking, you've heard me talk about that a little bit today. It's either this or it's that. Which one are we going to do? We only ever give ourselves two choices, and typically we already know where everybody's leaning. That's a binary. It's left or it's right. And we do this so much, particularly in this country, where you either right or you're wrong. You're either choosing this one or that one. It's black or it's white. You when we talk about race, we don't even necessarily include other possibilities, right? Or we just talk about race and gender as if there's nothing else to talk about. Give people two choices. They pick one or the other. Like we literally have terminology for binaries. When in other places, they're looking for third and fifth and seventh ways. And in more current generations, they don't understand why we do this. Like millennials they're like, why? Why are we doing that? Why are you saying this or this? Why aren't you saying this or 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 this? They make third ways. That's why we don't understand what they're doing. Because they're like, well, I thought you would do this or that. And then we're like, well, why did you think that? I never said that. I have 5 things in my head, right? So the world is changing because those generations are moving past binary thinking. And if your organization only has this to offer, they're also not going to work for you. There's something going on right now. NPR is talking about the Great Resignation, where millennials and beyond are like, I'm out. I can't. I don't understand why it has to be this way. So unless we start to shift from some of these ways of being, Gen X sought employment. Millennial and beyond, they create their own employment. And it's because of these things being very present, no matter what race they are, right? This social construct here, even white kids are not buying into this anymore. Power hoarding, I think you know what that is. Fear of open conflict, because nobody wants that. Just this idea that we have to have consensus, and we have to go along to get along. We agree to disagree, because it makes us uncomfortable to have conflict, because we don't have tools and mechanisms for addressing conflict publicly, openly, or privately, for that matter. The interesting thing is, because we can't do this, it's actually worse. We just leave. We just leave in our personal lives. We just quit. We have relationships where we just don't engage. At work, we see somebody coming, we just go the other way until we find another place to work. That's all the work avoidance of this right here. People don't vote. Like, you have those votes. I sit on 3 boards. It's like you cannot hide that you didn't vote. They're going to put it in the minutes. They need to know. But we'll still be like this, until somebody forces our hand, because we're trying to avoid this. Individualism. As long as my family is good, and I've done my part, my contribution to society, and I look around me and all my things look like they are intact, then my mission is complete. And mostly, I just don't look anywhere else. And that way I don't have to know that something's not right, because then I might have to do something for and about that. And that feels hard, so I just mind my little circle, right? And we do all kinds of interesting things to uphold this. We move our families to places based on individualism. We participate in very insular communities to preserve our individualism. We practice exclusivity in our friend circles. I have this one exercise called the Trusted 10, where you list your 10 closest confidants, and then you put their race, their ethnicity, their age, their academic status, their socioeconomics, and then you look across it and see basically that it all looks exactly the same. That we've created this nice bubble of homogeneity so that nobody upsets the apple cart. Then, Jonathan, when I call you and I ask your advice, guess who you're going to sound like? Me. And then that's just going to make me feel so affirmed in my decisions. And I'll be like, see, I asked 6 of my friends, they all said the same thing. Well, they're all you, so of course they did, right? But when you have diversity in your friend group, you get to hear the dissonance that allows you to kind of check yourself and hear things from a different perspective. Progress is bigger, more that goes over there with quantity or quality. Objectivity. We have rules and we have laws. They're the same for everybody, even though we just heard a bunch of stories in this room that were all very different. And everybody has to follow those rules and laws. We don't differentiate at all. And we saw that this past Olympic season, when they want these poor black girls to, you want me to put this in a swim cap? What do you want me to do? How? And they're like, well, this is the rule, this is the standard. If you want to swim on an Olympic team, you have to wear this swim cap. I cannot imagine what kind of migraine came with that process. And it seems silly and small until it's your head, right? So we have these ways of just streamlining everything. Well, I don't know what to tell you, right? But this is causing harm for people when you fit in these square pegs and these round holes. And then the right to comfort. We saw you all experience this with the pandemic and people needing their library books. And everybody who needed books were in the pandemic, but you all clearly were not, because you were supposed to operate at exactly the same clip for everybody who was needing their books because they were at home, quarantined and bored. But not this idea that we don't know yet either. We're figuring it out too. This right to comfort. I'm here and I pay my taxes, or I'm here and I'm a citizen, or I'm here and I'm a man, or whatever the thing is that qualifies you to be comfortable. Now everybody else's job is to rise to the occasion. We do this stuff all day. It's so second nature we don't even think about the fact that we're doing it. That's what makes it a social construct. That's what makes it priority or supremacist. Not that each one of them is wrong in any way. It's the pervasive nature in which we expect everybody to know it and be able to do it. If they can't, something bad is gonna happen. I'm gonna spend 2 quick seconds on interrogating this. So oftentimes, white people with white skin, when we're interrogating these characteristics, they become very upset. Well, I didn't do it. Why are you mad at me? And it's like, I'm not mad at you. I'm upset with the impact that these things are having on my life, right? But they just hear, white people just hear that you're indicting me. Here's the reason why. Since I was 4 years old, I've had reasons to look at blackness or womanness or poverty, socioeconomics, and interrogate, what are they saying about me? And how much of it is accurate and true and how much of it is not, right? Because there was always this negative connotation for this blackness that's a social construct, or this womanness that's a social construct. And so if I just took my definition whole, I would harm myself. So I had to literally pick the definition, the social construct of blackness or womanness. I had to pick it apart to find the parts I would keep and the parts like lazy. No, I'm not lazy. I am black and I'm not like, right? So I have to leave that behind. But if you are white, and all the characteristics that are handed to you as a part of whiteness are good and laudable and normative and traditional and appropriate and professional and standard, and you're like, okay, that's cool. You don't have any reason to learn how to practice interrogating that social construct. Consequently, you swallow the whole thing, and that thing now in your mind is the same as being you. Whereas for me, that thing was never the same as being me. I had to separate myself from the social construct of poor or black or woman. From the time I was 4 years old, I understood the difference, right? So then fast forward, now you're 45 or 50 or whatever, 17 in high school, and you hear all of this. Well, you've never had to interrogate it, so you have no practice, no muscle, no strength in looking at these things separate from yourself. That, friends, is where white fragility comes from. Because you don't have the muscle to bear this interrogation as something other than your own body. That was a heavy one to end with. So quickly, any questions about that practice of looking at these things as separate from myself so that I can get curious about how they're showing up in the world and who they might be helping, who they might be harming, as opposed to not even seeing these things because they're so second nature that I literally see them as myself. So when we have conversations about white supremacy, that's why I take it personally, because I see whiteness as me, not as a thing that I can get curious about. Is that a new, raise your hand if that's a new concept for you. Interrogating it as separate from yourself. David.
Yeah, well, I think the entire discussion about the 14 characteristics was new for me.
Yep.
So, very eye-opening.
The last thing we just did, Jonathan, I promise I'm going to start here the next time, because it's too heavy to just leave it like this. We need more time with so how do you interrogate this list? What I want you to do between now and the next time we come back together, we have different objectives the next time you'll see me, but I want you to think about this list, and at night when you're ready to shut it down, look at the list and assess where you see yourself each day. It's what's going to make you more acutely aware and more very present to how you uphold these things that are the foundation for white supremacy. And if you can hear my voice, we do it. Okay? Whew. That's good for today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. All right. I think we now are on to agenda item number 5. Therefore, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rashida.